The greatest stories in the human saga are never written in times of ease, but are forged in the white-hot fires of a crisis that threatens to burn everything we know to the ground. Imagine the streets of New York City in 1928, where the air tasted like champagne and the ticker tape machines sang a non-stop song of infinite prosperity. For nearly a decade, the United States had been riding a wave of unprecedented growth, where the average citizen believed they had finally unlocked the secret to eternal wealth through the magic of the stock market. People were buying radios, cars, and washing machines on credit, fueled by a collective optimism that suggested the sky was no longer the limit, but merely a starting point. But beneath this glittering surface of jazz and gold, the foundations were beginning to crack in ways that almost no one noticed until it was far too late to run. You might think that the collapse was a slow, agonizing slide that gave everyone time to pack their bags, but the reality is far more shocking because of how violently the floor dropped out from under the world's feet. In October of 1929, the music didn't just stop, the entire ballroom collapsed. On what we now call Black Tuesday, the stock market lost nearly $14 billion in a single day of frantic, panic trading where millionaires became paupers before the lunch hour ended. It wasn't just about lost paper wealth, it was the sudden, terrifying realization that the entire economic system was a house of cards. Banks across the nation began to fold, and because there was no insurance for deposits back then, families watched their entire life savings vanish into thin air while they stood helplessly on the sidewalk. The human cost that followed that fateful autumn turned the American dream into a struggle for survival that tested the very fabric of our society. By the early 1930s, the unemployment rate had skyrocketed to 25%, meaning 1 out of every 4 able-bodied Americans was wandering the streets looking for work that simply did not exist. These weren't just statistics, these were proud fathers who couldn't look their children in the eye and mothers who were thinning the soup with water just to make it last another night. Great cities were surrounded by Hoovervilles, sprawling shantytowns made of cardboard and scrap metal where the once proud middle class lived in conditions that defied the promises of the modern age. Yet, in the middle of this absolute darkness, something began to stir in the American spirit that would eventually change the course of global history forever. Subscribe to the channel now for your daily dose of audio history and hit the like button if you're enjoying this journey through our past. The turning point didn't come from a sudden infusion of cash, but from a radical shift in the very definition of what it meant to be an American citizen and what the government owed its people. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt took the oath of office in 1933, he inherited a nation that was literally teetering on the edge of a total revolution or a complete societal breakdown. His voice, carried across the airwaves in the very first fireside chat, did something that no amount of gold could do. It restored the nation's confidence. He told a terrified public that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, and for the first time in 4 long years, the American people felt like someone was actually steering the ship through the fog. This was the birth of the New Deal, a whirlwind of legislative action that sought to provide immediate relief and permanent reform to the broken American machine. What happened next was a peaceful revolution that fundamentally reshaped the American landscape from coast to coast, proving that the government could be a force for good. Roosevelt launched what became known as the alphabet soup of agencies, starting with the Civilian Conservation Corps, which took 3 million young men out of the breadlines and put them to work in the wilderness. Imagine the pride of a young man who had been starving in a city slum suddenly finding himself building a bridge or a road that would stand for a century, earning $30 a month and sending 25 of it back home. This wasn't just a government program, it was a massive restoration of human dignity that proved the American worker was ready to build their way out of any hole, no matter how deep the world had dug it. The New Deal didn't just stop at physical labor, it went after the systemic rot that had allowed the 1929 crash to happen in the first place, creating safeguards we still rely on. The creation of the Social Security Act in 1935 ensured that the elderly would never again face the prospect of a penniless, starving retirement after a lifetime of hard work. Meanwhile, the Securities and Exchange Commission was established to act as a watchdog over Wall Street, ensuring that the wild, unregulated gambling of the 20s could never happen again. We often think of these as dry, bureaucratic agencies, but at the time, they were radical declarations that the American government existed to protect the common man, not just the wealthy elite. It was a bold experiment in social democracy that proved capitalism could be saved from its own worst impulses through transparency and care. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss our daily history deep dives, and drop a like to support the channel. As the mid-1930s progressed, the landscape of the United States was being physically transformed by the Works Progress Administration, which built over 600,000 miles of roads. But the most surprising element of this era wasn't just the concrete and steel. It was the visionary investment in the American soul and its unique cultural identity. The government actually paid artists to paint murals in post offices and writers to document the stories of former slaves and pioneers, ensuring that even in the depths of a depression, our culture would flourish. This period taught us that a nation's wealth isn't just in its bank vaults, but in the collective skills and stories of its people. We weren't just surviving a crisis. We were reinventing what it meant to be a modern superpower that valued its history as much as its future prosperity. The transformation of the American landscape during this period was also environmental, as the nation learned that you cannot neglect the land that sustains you without facing consequences. During the 1930s, the Great Plains were hit by the Dust Bowl, a series of terrifying storms that turned the sun black at noon and buried farmhouses in mountains of dry silt. In response, the New Deal taught farmers how to preserve the soil, planting massive shelter belts of trees to break the wind and implementing new techniques to save the precious topsoil. This was the moment when America realized its natural resources were not infinite, leading to a new era of conservation that saved the heartland from becoming a permanent desert. It showed that the American spirit wasn't just about conquering the land, but about learning to live in harmony with it for the sake of future generations. By 1936, the psychological landscape of the country had shifted so drastically that the despair of the previous decade felt like a bad dream from which the nation was waking up. Though millions were still struggling, there was a sense that the government was no longer a distant entity, but a partner in the survival of the ordinary citizen. Roosevelt's landslide re-election in 1936 was a thunderous validation of this new American social contract, proving that the people valued security and dignity over the old ways. This era redefined the American presidency itself, turning the office into a beacon of hope and a source of direct communication with the public that changed politics forever. We learned that a leader's greatest power is the ability to command the spirit of a people and convince them that their best days are still ahead of them. The infrastructure built during the New Deal era didn't just provide jobs, it provided the very veins and arteries through which American commerce and culture would flow for the next 100 years. From the massive Hoover Dam, which brought electricity to the desert, to the thousands of rural schools that brought modern life to isolated corners of the country, it was a physical rebuilding of the nation. When you drive on an American highway today, there is a high probability you are touching the legacy of a worker from the 1930s who was just grateful for a chance to work. This massive investment in our collective future created a multiplier effect that prepared the United States for the industrial challenges of the 1940s. It was a period of frantic, beautiful creation that reminds us that when we invest in ourselves, the returns are measured in the strength and longevity of our civilization. One of the most profound aspects of the New Deal was how it began to slowly address the deep-seated inequalities that had plagued American life since its inception, even if the progress was slow. The New Deal era saw the first significant steps toward including African Americans and other marginalized groups in the national conversation of relief and recovery through federal oversight. Leaders like Mary McLeod Bethune became part of the Black Cabinet, advising the president on how to ensure that the new federal programs reached those historically excluded from the dream. This period sowed the early seeds of the civil rights movement, as the federal government began to acknowledge its responsibility to all its citizens regardless of their background. It was a dawning realization that a nation cannot truly be prosperous unless that prosperity is accessible to everyone who is willing to contribute their labor. The New Deal also revolutionized the way Americans thought about their own labor, creating a power balance that helped build the strongest middle class the world had ever seen. The Fair Labor Standards Act and the Wagner Act gave workers the legal right to organize and bargain collectively, ensuring the wealth created by industry would be shared more equitably. This was a radical departure from the past where workers were often treated as disposable parts, and it led to a period of rising wages and better conditions. It turned the American worker into a title of immense pride, a symbol of someone who could own a home and retire with dignity because the law stood behind them. This structural shift didn't just help the workers, it stabilized the entire economy by creating a massive base of consumers who could afford to buy the products they made. The short-term reflexes of the New Deal were felt almost immediately in the stabilizing of the banking system and the steady decline of the breadlines that had once defined city life. While the Great Depression wouldn't fully end until the massive industrial mobilization of the Second World War, the New Deal provided the essential floor that stopped the nation's fall. It created the foundation for the modern economy and established the protections, like the 40-hour work week and the minimum wage, that we still rely on today. Looking back, we shouldn't just see a time of poverty and struggle, we should see a testament to American resilience and the incredible things achieved when a nation pulls together. We proved that even when the world is falling apart, we have the heart to build something even stronger and more inclusive than what we lost in the crash. As we reflect on the decade between 1929 and 1939, we see a story of a nation that was forced to look into the mirror and decide its own destiny. The crisis of 1929 was a tragedy of global proportions, but the response to it was a triumph of the human spirit that echoes through every social safety net we enjoy. It reminds us that no matter how dark the path may seem, there is always a way forward for those with the courage to innovate and the will to work together. The legacy of this era is the enduring belief that we are our brother's keeper and that our greatest achievements are the ones we build during our darkest hours. We are a nation built on the ruins of yesterday's failures, constantly perfecting ourselves for the challenges of the future. In every bridge built by the WPA and every bank deposit protected by the FDIC, we see the fingerprints of a generation that refused to give up when the world told them they were finished. They didn't just want to return to the way things were, they wanted to build something better, something more resilient, and something more just for everyone. This is the true source of our pride, the knowledge that when the American people were tested by the greatest catastrophe in history, they didn't turn toward despair, but toward each other. They built a legacy that has lasted nearly a century, providing the stability and the opportunity that we often take for granted in our modern lives. As we navigate the uncertainties of our own time, we can find the strength to face our own challenges with that same legendary grit. Today, as we look back at the 1920s and 30s, we see a mirror of our own capacity for renewal and the constant, restless energy that defines our national character. The crisis of 1929 was a hard, bitter lesson in the dangers of greed, but the New Deal was a masterclass in leadership, empathy, and national mobilization. It reminds us that our story is not one of constant progress, but one of falling down and getting back up, each time stronger and wiser than before. We are the heirs to a tradition of bold experimentation and a commitment to the idea that every citizen deserves a square deal and a chance to succeed. Let this history inspire you to look at our modern world not with fear, but with the eyes of a builder ready to contribute to the story. The story of the 1930s is ultimately a story of hope that was earned through sweat, tears, and a refusal to accept defeat in the face of overwhelming odds. We learned that a democratic government could be powerful enough to protect its citizens and humble enough to serve them, creating a model for the rest of the world. As we close this chapter of our history, remember that the bridges and roads we use today were built by people who had nothing but a shovel and the belief that a better day was coming. Their legacy is our strength, and their courage is our roadmap for whatever crises may lie ahead in our own journey. We are a people who do not fold under pressure. We are a people who reinvent ourselves and come out stronger on the other side. Subscribe for more daily audio history and hit that like button to join our community of history enthusiasts. If you found this journey through the Great Depression and the New Deal inspiring, let me know in the comments which part of American history we should explore next. Your support allows us to keep bringing these vital stories to life, and we look forward to seeing you in the next chapter of our collective journey.